Hello and welcome to Grody UnPrOfEsSiOnAL. My name is Justin McMenamy, and my mission is to share both profitable and painful leadership lessons I have acquired over a 20-year career as a misfit in corporate America. In this episode, we continue our survey of asymmetric competitions by discussing the leadership traits of the insurgent leader, including the delicate balance of being a leader that politely doesn't care what others think. Brad Stoller, welcome back to the second part of our conversation on asymmetric warfare and on the infinite game. For those of you just listening in, last episode we talked about precision planting coming onto the scene in agriculture and becoming a player that the biggest competitors wanted to remove from the field, and really how precision planting, yourself, myself, others, had to view the field in order to set the strategy to compete against organizations that were 10, 15, 20, 100 times bigger than us. And that was to look at authors like Simon Sinek, that business is more like battle than it is like baseball. And authors like Ivan Toft, who says that historically, the small actor in a battle is actually winning more than 50% of the time, as long as they take a strategy that is different than the large actor. Today, what I want to do is I want to dig into, at a leadership level, whether it be a product manager or a general manager or even an engineering manager, we were very intentional about who we picked for leaders. Because once we decide that we're going to use insurgent warfare, we're going to use asymmetric small warfare, you have to pick the right leaders in order to execute that strategy. It can all make sense on the whiteboard, but if that's not translating into conversations, if that's not translating into actions, into decisions, and into thinking patterns, it's all for naught. Because the reality is, far more people on earth are comfortable with the large actor way of going about an infinite game than they are comfortable going about the small actor way of going about an infinite game. And today, we're going to spend some time talking through the character traits of the leaders that historically have proven to be successful in weak actor competitions, but also the character traits that we sought in looking for leaders at precision planting.
I look forward to the conversation. It definitely is a different way of thinking, a different type of person, not someone that is maybe grown up in a large organization, but someone that understands the mission that we are trying to achieve.
Yeah, we would look for people that fell into the category of the black sheep of the blue chip.
That's right.
We looked for people that did not fit in, that the gears didn't mesh with large multinational publicly traded organizations. In an interview, if someone were to say, I'm doing great at the big company and I've got 3 promotions coming up and I'm just looking to make more money and I'm looking for more responsibility, our answer was generally, keep doing you.
Probably not a good fit here.
We would ask the question, why are you interviewing? If the answer was, I went to college because I wanted to do something. I wanted to be part of something directly. And in the large organization, I'm pushing spreadsheets, I'm pushing emails, I'm tending to meetings. I'm not doing. I don't smell the action. I don't smell the customer. I don't smell the movement. That was the style of answer that we knew this is going to fit well.
Someone that was willing to get their boots dirty, someone that was willing to be at the ground level, understanding what was going on, understanding who the customers were, understanding what we were trying to do.
That's right. That's right. So one of the characteristics that we looked for time and time again is a person that is extremely missional, a high belief person, a person that would believe in mission over career, in mission over advancement. They would hold nothing back to attain the mission for the team, not for self-glory, but for the team. We talked last episode around our founder. He was an extremely belief-oriented, missional person. He was going to disrupt the industry on behalf of the farmer. We sought people, even after he exited the business, that were belief-oriented people that loved what we were doing and wanted to pour everything into who we were and what we were doing, which was to take on the largest players in the industry. One of the rallying cries that we used over and over and over again is we are going to change agriculture from a farm shed in Tremont.
That's right. We talked about Simon Sinek last time too, and one of the principles of the infinite game is there needs to be, I think he calls it a just cause. It's something bigger than the organization itself. It's something bigger than what any one person can do. Exactly what you said there, Justin. A small organization trying to do something far bigger than any one of us could have achieved on our own.
Yeah. There's also, I'll use the term, a selective irrationality to a belief structure and to a belief. Anyone could logically and rationally look at precision planting for most of the last 30 years and say, you guys think you're going to change agriculture from a farm shop in Tremont, Illinois? You're silly. You're fools. That's not going to happen. There's competitors that are 175 years older than you. There's competitors that are 1,000 times bigger than you. You guys are absolutely delusional. But it's that belief in the mission that drives and that excites and energizes, and we recruited off of it. We would say these phrases in the interview because if the interviewee was energized by that, that was a sign in the positive direction. If the interviewee was like, no, you guys aren't going to do that. Okay, you can believe that, but we believe it.
A big difference. Is it focused on myself in my career, or is it focused on the mission?
Right.
And we always would go with the person that was focused on the mission, someone that caught the vision of what we were trying to achieve.
That's right. Over the years, we had meetings with a lot of OEMs, businesses that were significantly bigger than we were. And there was one meeting in particular where we were going to come together and we were going to talk about our various strategies on an ag data platform. An ag data platform was the huge buzzword that was going around at the time. There were hundreds of startups, seemingly. Everyone was trying to create an ag data platform. Originally, the meeting was supposed to be 3 people from Precision Planting and 3 people from this OEM. It was supposed to be a small, collaborative, get-to-know-you meeting. And about a week before the meeting, their side of the invite list exploded. And this happens in large organizations. If there's a show, I want to be there. And well, I need to be there because I need to represent this initiative and I need to represent this initiative. I remember walking into the room at Precision Planting. We had to actually change conference rooms because of how much the roster inflated. We showed up with our 3 people and they showed up with probably 25 people. There were people that flew from Europe. There were people that flew from South America for this meeting in which we were going to share strategy. I had home field advantage, so I let the visitors go first. The executive gets up, he puts up his slide deck, and I'll let you guess, what is the first slide in every executive presentation?
It was probably the one showing what the growth of this ag data platform was going to be over the next 10, 15 years.
Well, that's the second slide.
That was the second slide.
You got to get the org chart out of the way first.
That's right. The org chart. I forgot about that.
Can't forget the org chart. So we got to go through all of the layers of the org chart and we got to pat every of the 25 people on the back. One thing I had done going into this meeting, and I made this decision consciously, I decided that despite there being 25 and 3 in the room, I was going to interact as if there were 3 and 3. You act differently if there's 28 people in a room and 6 people in a room. I made the conscious decision, largely out of frustration, that I was going to behave as if there was only 6 people in the room. He's up there, he's given the presentation, he shows all of his org chart, and then he shows all of the processes that they have and all of the customer stories that they have, and all of the milestones that they have and all of the growth that there's going to be and on and on and on. Finally, I raised my hand because it was wandering. The presentation was just wandering. So I raised my hand, again, acting as if there's only 6 people in the room, to the vice president who's presenting. And I said, hey, I just got a simple question. Ag data platform. Right now, there are 100 people waking up every day with the goal of having the ag data platform that is globally used. Who's going to win? Just let's have a theoretical conversation. Who's going to win? Is it the input companies because they have access to traits and genetics and they're the ones that are the closest to yield results and yield trials? Is it the equipment companies because equipment touching the soil, that's where most of the data comes from? Is it outside because of scale that Silicon Valley or Seattle is going to come in? Just help me understand, as you understand the field at play, who's going to win? His answer stunned me. He's presenting with 25 of his subordinates in the room. And his answer, plain as day, well, not us. What? I said, what do you mean? Well, not us. We're way smaller than the big ones, and we got a late start, and we this, and we this. And he lists off 6 or 7 reasons why he is asymmetrically small in a field, and therefore he doesn't stand a chance. And I just said, I am sorry. I cannot comprehend your answer. Every day I wake up believing that we are going to catch John Deere from behind. They're 1,000 times bigger than us and they have a 175-year head start. But I'm going to catch them from behind because the customer needs us to catch them from behind. And the day that I wake up and I don't believe that we're going to catch them from behind, that's my last day in this organization. He stared back at me as dumbfounded as I was staring at him. And it's just to highlight the importance of belief inside of an asymmetrically small organization.
During that period of time, there was this hypothetical pot of gold in ag data, and everyone was chasing after this elusive pot of gold. To my knowledge, no one has yet to find this pot of gold that is out there. We were some of the early ones to realize that. The mission is to help the customer and bring things to the customer, bring things to the farmer that they can actually use. There were very few people during that period of time that understood what the mission was or what the vision was, or even who the customer was.
Yeah, there were many pursuing the ag data platform because of what it would do for their shareholder far more than what it would do for the customer.
Those platforms did not have staying power or did not develop into something, at least not what the initial vision for the organization was.
That's right. One other aspect that, as we studied these generals, is a fierce independence. These asymmetrically small leaders, they know that their organization, their army, their military has to do it, and they're not going to get a lot of help from the outside. Therefore, there's a fierce independence that's built inside. Part of that is a suspicion of the establishment, the suspicion of the outside. The Civil War in the United States is a very interesting historic data point, and I had never thought of it from this perspective. Every general that took the field at the beginning of the Civil War on both sides went to the exact same war college.
Interesting.
And had fought together in the Mexican-American War less than a decade before. If you take from a strategy perspective, the American Civil War, everyone started from the exact same baseline because they had been in the exact same military 2 years before. There's an interesting aspect where there are many of the generals on both sides that throughout the rest of their career, many of them didn't make it to the end of the war. Lincoln had to fire a lot of them, but they stuck to an old script despite the war evolving. At the beginning of the Civil War, both sides thought that it was going to be a gentleman's war, that it was going to be 6 months, we're going to exchange some shots, we'll figure it out, and we'll move along as two separate organizations from the Confederate side, from the Union side, thinking the Confederacy would fall very quickly and that it would reunite. But there were a few generals that were very progressive in their thinking about strategy and were fiercely independent in how they were viewed by the rest of the military. And one of them in particular is Stonewall Jackson. Stonewall Jackson is an aloof dude. He's not someone that worries too much about what Richmond thinks about him. He was fiercely independent. He far more wanted autonomy in the Shenandoah Valley. He far more wanted autonomy from the rest of the established military than he wanted to, quote unquote, collaborate or integrate with the rest of the military.
He was more looking for freedom to operate as he best saw fit within his organization.
That's right.
Instead of following the status quo of the larger organization.
Right. And as we think about precision planting, and this is where you and I spent a lot of time on this subject, there were a lot of times where there were established suppliers in the industry that for one reason or another is where everybody else went. But typically those organizations were high cost structure. They were slow to respond. Ag is not a huge industry when compared to other industries like medical devices, like aerospace, like automotive. There were a lot of suppliers that were in ag, but it was the least profitable, least exciting, least interesting division within that company. We would have competitors in ag that would go to those suppliers and quickly became handcuffed because they would need changes and the supplier wouldn't respond. There's multiple meetings that I can think of across our history where you and I sat in a meeting with a supplier and they gave us every list of excuses about why they wouldn't be able to respond quickly, why they wouldn't be able to make a change, why they wouldn't be able to do this or this. And as you and I are walking to the parking lot, the answer was always, well, we're just going to do it ourselves.
Yes. We very much optimized for someone that understood the type of speed that we were looking for, someone that maybe didn't have the overhead or maybe all the plaques on the wall, but we optimized someone that actually got who we were and got the mission and caught the vision of what we were trying to achieve.
Right. Fierce independence is not typical in a large established organization. Large established organizations, whether they be military, whether they be business, they are highly focused on collaboration, highly focused on integration, highly focused on alignment. These are phrases that get used a lot. I can only say it because the name of my podcast is Grody UnPrOfEsSiOnAL. Those were not words that we ever used within precision planting. It was to say, we viewed integration as slowing us down. We thought of alignment as a waste of time. We did not focus on using others' assets, others' knowledge for our benefit. It was much faster. It was much more successful if we went and created or garnered that knowledge ourselves rather than relying on others who were not bought into our mission. We're not bought into what we were focused on. There's an example that you and I lived through. We were designing a component, and it was a highly complex component that only 2 suppliers in the United States had the manufacturing expertise to execute. Both of them were focused in aerospace and in medical. We went to them and said, hey, we're thinking about doing this and this and this. And they looked at us and said, who is precision planting? Agriculture sounds dirty, meaning low margins compared to medical and aerospace. They basically said, this is not something we're interested in. As we're leaving the meeting, very similarly, okay, sounds like we're doing it ourselves. We had an engineer, a guy by the name of Todd Swanson. He dedicated the next year of his life to as rapidly as possible iterating on this technology, figuring out how to make the component. We went back to those suppliers a year later and said, hey, we were actually wondering if you could make this. And we hand them a functioning prototype.
Their response was, where did you get this from? What supplier are you using? Because this technology or this process, there were so few people that were doing it. This supplier was making parts for NASA, for JPL, for some of these far out technologies. And when they saw that we were able to replicate some of those things, I think it blew their mind.
Yes.
One, that we had that technical capability, but that we so rapidly were actually able to develop it.
And they quickly decided that supplying us the component was a better solution than having us execute on our newfound knowledge. Even in the instance where we did partner, this would be an instance where we did end up partnering with someone, we used our fierce desire for independence to create leverage, to create benefits for ourselves in the negotiation as to how and on by what terms we would work together.
It changed the entire conversation of, one, we proved that we technically knew what we were doing. But two, even on the cost side, when we can build this ourselves as option number one, or we can partner with you as option number two, they quickly decided to come to the table, and we already understood exactly where the cost structure was on this given component.
That's right. Another component that as you study how small organizations, how small militaries compete with and ultimately can be successful against asymmetrically larger militaries and businesses, speed above all.
Yes.
It's almost universal that these organizations are tuned for speed, blistering speed. I was thinking about this. So in physics, momentum is calculated by taking mass, by taking the size of something and multiplying it by its velocity, by how fast it goes. The small organization who lacks size, the way that you make that up is with speed. And in a business context, that's speed to market, that's speed to decisions, that speed of information flowing through the organization. When we thought of constructing the ethos and constructing the architecture of the organization, everything was tuned for speed.
Yes.
I was far more afraid of making a decision too slowly than I was of making the wrong decision. Everything was focused on the speed of iteration. As I've been exposed to organizations, both in the ag industry and in other industries, organizations that are smaller, this logic emerges, which says, man, we only have a tenth as much money as the big player in the industry. And so we have to be yet more perfect, yet more strategic, yet more careful with the dollars that we have. We need to look to multiply the impact of our dollars. What can happen is there's this emerging mindset that you have to be more heady with how you spend the money. You have to be more careful, more rational. My experience is that is all baloney. It's absolutely all junk. At the end of the day, when you lack resources, the only way that I've seen is you have to make it up in speed. It has to be in a strategy. You can't take the field with the exact same strategy as the large organization. But once you've evolved to a new strategy, you then have to go as absolutely quickly as possible. One conversation that you and I had over and over and over again was the goal of getting a product to market 3 years faster than any competitor in the industry. If two engineers, one at our company and one at another company, has the same idea on the same morning as they drive into work, our goal was from that concept to a launched for sale commercial product would be 3 years faster. In order to do that, how many hundreds of approvals have to be removed from the process?
Speed to make decisions, even simple decisions, was key. The other thing that we would say, and you touched on this as well, is iteration.
Yes.
We tried to keep engineers out of as many meetings as we possibly could, where they could be designing, iterating, testing, and that afternoon start on version 2, and maybe even that evening be working on version 3. The more iterations, the more time that they could be spending on that, that's where we wanted them. and make decisions quickly.
That's
like
right.
you said, even
That's
if
right.
they're the wrong ones, we would learn that, we would modify our opinions, and we would work on the next one.
That's right. Part of enabling decisions to be made quickly is removing the number of people required to make the decision.
That's right.
And in fact, removing steps, removing processes, removing approval meetings is how we sped up, where you're actually empowering engineers to make decisions along the way. Now, you never allowed for 27 decisions over the course of 6 months to all be made in a vacuum. As the decisions are being made, you're communicating those decisions back to the rest of the organization so that if there is a misstep, it can be critiqued. But you didn't wait for a decision to move. You communicated your decision as you were moving.
That's right. Stephen Covey wrote a book a number of years ago called The Speed of Trust. You talked about approvals. What are approvals actually meant for? They're meant when you don't trust someone to make the correct decision on their own. The environment or the culture that we tried to create is one where we trusted people to make good decisions. We said, make the same decision as if you own the company, because in some ways you actually do. Make the decision as if you are the one spending the money and this is coming out of your checkbook. Giving that trust to the employees sped up so many aspects of this. They didn't have to wait for approvals. In many cases, we gave pretty open access to, say, a purchase order log where someone could make a decision to purchase the components or the parts that they needed on this project that they were trying to develop.
Over the course of the decade that you and I worked together, we launched over 25 products. Were they all winners? Absolutely not. But we did have more winners than anyone else in the industry. It was not focused on making sure that every shot went in. It was focused on taking shots that we believed could go in as fast as possible and learning as much or more from the ones that bounced out than the ones that went in. It's this ironic thing. We never focused on creating a process that made sure that we spent our pennies as carefully as possible. We made a process that made sure we could move as rapidly as possible and take increasingly informed shots across the arc of time. And the irony was it also delivered decreased costs in how long and how much time it took to develop and how much money it took to develop products.
Yes. I would say this also gets back to the type of people that we hired for the organization. We hired people that did not need directive communication for every step that they would do. We hired people that could understand the mission, could understand the project, could understand the scope of what we were looking for, and then they could execute on those decisions, and we would trust them to do that.
That's right. As you think about military examples, Stonewall Jackson through the Shenandoah Valley, he was marching his army twice as far in a given day than historically had been done. The Union Army never knew where he was going to pop up next. A lot of his strategy was built around the element of surprise, and the element of surprise is always enabled by the element of speed. Another example came from the Korean War. The North Koreans had the ability to disassemble an artillery battery and hand carry it down a goat path, reassemble that battery overnight, and be firing by sunrise the next morning. The U.S. needed the Corps of Engineers to create a road. They needed 2.5-ton trucks to pull the artillery. There was a massive aspect of speed and agility that these asymmetrically small organizations were able to utilize, which absolutely gave them a strategic advantage on the field.
Another one that comes to mind, Genghis Khan would travel over 100 miles in one day, their cavalry would, which was unheard of. And part of it, again, just taking a different strategy. Each one of the horsemen would actually have 4 horses. They were always riding a fresh horse. There wasn't another cavalry in the world that could stand up to this. Someone that could travel 100 miles in one day. They were popping up in places that no one expected them to
That's
be.
Right. That's right. Another discipline is you survey leaders of organizations that are asymmetrically smaller than their competition is the willingness and the ability to adapt quickly to an emerging environment. We talked about in the last episode that an infinite game is not governed by a clock. It's not governed by a set of rules. It's not governed by even who's competing at a given moment. Once you realize it's an infinite game, measuring what's actually happening, understanding what's happening at the front lines of the business or of the battlefield becomes absolutely critical, because strategies can become obsolete any given day of an infinite game. At Precision Planting, there was a huge focus on locating leadership at the front lines. At the front lines.
That's right.
Where the battle was taking place.
A story that comes to mind here with the chip shortage that we faced. That was a situation no one could have completely predicted how that came to be. Most of those decisions happened at the front line. We would set out the mission saying we want to be the last man standing and the first one back up.
That's right.
And with that being the mission, that gave the instructions to the people that were way closer on the front lines on what they needed to do so that we would achieve that. So we would be the last one down, the first one.
That's right. And as you look at historical contexts, as leadership moves farther and farther away from the front line, a distorted view of reality is ultimately what the leader is presented with.
Yes.
Sometimes it is because of their leadership style. Sometimes it's because they do kill the messenger that they get a distorted view of reality. Sometimes it's just that the person who's ferrying the information is not able to discern what components of reality are critical to convey versus what components of reality are really immaterial to a strategy change. One example that I just was fascinated when I came across it was of Robert McNamara as the Secretary of War in the Vietnam War. McNamara was a data guy. He was a data analytics guy. He wanted as much information as possible. He gave these cards to battalion chiefs that they were supposed to fill out every day. How much ammunition was used, how much resources were used, how many of the enemy were removed from the field, on and on and on. And then all of this information was going to be collated back to a computer model to dictate what strategy should become. The book that I was reading, it said that in the totality of the Vietnam War, if you sum up the fatalities logged by the U.S. military and its allies of the North Vietnamese, the number tallied is greater than the population of North Vietnam.
Yes. This gets back to the importance. You and I spent a lot of time looking at data and looking at reports, but you have to ground truth it with
Absolutely.
What is actually going on out in the floor, what is actually going on out in the field. The importance of having data to inform and direct decisions, but you have to double check it. You have to be on the floor to see what is
That's
actually
right.
happening.
And there's simply a time aspect to not being proximal to the front line. We use the chip shortage, for example. That was a scenario that was evolving by the hour.
That's right.
In many instances, it was not that all decisions had to move through leadership, yourself as the head of purchasing, but it was to say for you to be at the front lines, sitting literally in the same cube with purchasing agents, literally in the same cube with engineers, you were proximal to the occurrences and could speak into them in situ. There wasn't we got a meeting with Brad next Wednesday. Let's ask him what we should do. By you being in proximity, you were able to speak into it, and they were able to ask your opinion in a dynamic environment.
That's right. There's a part of it too. Hold plans loosely.
Amen.
And be willing to change as new information came in. That's what we had to do in those situations. Once we understood, hey, the market just changed again. We have to pay more for this. We would quickly go and talk to the commercial team and say, hey, we have no choice but to adjust pricing on some of these products. We had very tight communication between the different groups.
Yeah. Being very, very close to the front lines. There is a balance to be struck. And this came from George S. Patton's memoirs. Patton was known for being in the field, in the trenches, but he couldn't be in every trench. The Third Army was far bigger than knowing George Patton personally. He talks in his memoir that you should not, I don't agree with this fully, but I take the spirit of it. He said he would never take advice or take a recommendation from someone more than 2 levels below him in the organization, meaning he would never ask someone 2 levels of the organization below him, what should we do? He said that would undermine the chain of command, and he did not want to undermine the chain of command. That doesn't mean that he didn't interact with people 2, 3, 4, 5 levels below him, but he did not ask them for advice. It's to say you need to be close to the front lines. At the same time, you can't undermine leadership that is inside of your organization. There's this aspect where you need to be close to the front line, but you can't be caught in the fog of war. An example, George Patton would say in his memoir, I never internalized an intelligence report that was submitted after dark, because in the fog of war, the numbers were inflated 10-fold, 50-fold over what they would be during the day. He was known as someone at the front line, but he was careful to guard himself. He was being careful who provided information, how that information was provided. He may receive it, but he didn't internalize it all, because if you live next to the front line, you're going to be inundated with too much data. You have to understand what can be filtered out and what can't.
And I would say as part of leadership, there can be so much information flowing in. You have to take those times where you take a step back and look at something from 30,000 feet to understand what is actually going on.
So an example for us at Precision Planting, no manager in the R&D organization had an office. Every one of us sat in a cube next to our team, because even if the door is open on an office, there is a barrier to communication that I got to walk over to your desk. I got to see if you're there. I got to ask you if I can talk to you. Whereas you or I would be sitting amongst the cubes, information flowed just that much quicker, not in the calendar time, but how approachable we were. It's not the difference between walking to an office and not walking to an office. It was truly the unspoken approachability of a leader sitting in a cube that allowed us to get such more rich information of what was going on at the front lines with suppliers and purchasing, or with the product in the customer's hands.
If we need to have private conversations, we can go to a conference room and have that. But again, there is so much that you can hear just by sitting among all the employees. You gain so much more of what is actually going on the ground.
The other component that played into this is you're approachable as a leader when you're present as a leader.
Yes.
And I'm not talking about being there at the moment that the idea comes up. I'm talking about having been there in the office over a substantive amount of time, that you are approachable socially, you're approachable as a person. And there's a couple things that come to mind as I think about that. One, we never had during COVID a everybody work from home policy. And as a leader, I found myself saying, I need to be in the office, not because I was trying to shame somebody who wasn't going to come into the office, but it was to say, I want to be seen as being approachable, as being here, as being close to the front lines. There were a lot of people in other organizations, they observed once it was you can work from home, my division manager disappeared. I haven't seen that dude for 2 years except on Zoom calls. That is absolutely a barrier to information flow.
Absolutely. There is a way bigger barrier if you have to call someone over Zoom.
Yes.
There just is, versus being able to walk up to someone's desk and have a off-the-cuff conversation with them, or find out what the problem is. Again, this gets back even into the speed conversation that we had before. I think proximity and direct communication and trust are all key aspects of this.
The other component was, even as we moved into and started working for large multinational organizations, our leaders did not do the travel circuit. Every large multinational organization has a travel circuit. This is where the product managers meet every quarter. This is where the engineering managers meet every quarter. This is the alignment meeting. If you're not careful, a leader can have massive percentage of their time consumed with travel to meetings in which really no decisions are being made. It ties back to the fierce autonomy that we already talked about. Our leaders were not subjected to traveling for internal alignment purposes the way that many large multinational organizations require their leaders. Again, putting them in the office, putting them with the customer so that they were closer to the front lines. You see this in some of these historical narratives. Stonewall Jackson was not hanging out in Richmond. George Patton was not hanging out in Paris. These guys would much rather be on the front line than in the chateau.
Also, anytime there is an alignment meeting, there were probably 10 meetings preceding that, the alignment before the alignment, and then the alignment after the alignment meetings. You can get caught in this never-ending chain of meetings to try to align.
That's right.
Versus just boots on the ground, as close to the front lines as possible.
The founder's mentality says, you've gone over to the bureaucracy when success is measured by the attainment of alignment. When at the end of the meeting, everybody's aligned. You haven't done anything, but you've intellectually agreed to do something, and you call that a success. You've been given over to the bureaucracy at that point.
Yes.
A counter argument that I can hear in some and have heard is, hey, if you aren't traveling to all of these global meetings and you aren't attending all of these alignment meetings, what's to say that you aren't wasting money? What's to say that you aren't doing counterproductive things at a global sense or in an organizational sense? It may make sense to you in your little farm shop in Tremont, but globally you might be going against the mission. And my counterpoint always to that was, because of the fierce autonomy, we aren't looking to be coordinated. We aren't looking to be in a dance where we have to be this tight interaction of movement. All I'm trying to do is prevent friendly fire. I just need to know where you're going to be on the map and what you're going to be doing on the map so that I don't aim there. And the amount of time and effort it takes to coordinate not shooting at each other is categorically lower than the amount of time and effort it takes to perform a ballet with one another.
That's right. This gets back to the whole conversation of speed as well. Instead of working specifically on the problem that we're trying to develop a solution for, you're slowed down trying to align.
That's right. So every one of these leads ultimately to the fact that the insurgent leader is not going to be understood by their organization. And in fact, there's going to be many in the broader organization that are going to be very frustrated, very angry about the existence of this insurgent organization. You see this with other generals in the Confederate Army, their view of Stonewall Jackson. You see the British military's view of Sterling and the SAS. A person that is mission-based, prioritizes speed, is fiercely independent, and doesn't come to the alignment meetings is not going to fit in with the establishment.
That's
and
right.
So by definition, a person that we were recruiting was someone who fitting in was not high on their needs list. They were comfortable being the outcast of an establishment, but they couldn't be a jerk. It was someone that could feather that balance of politely not caring what you think about the situation.
Yes, it is not being a jerk about things, but it is standing on those principles that we talk about speed, about autonomy, about focus on the customer, about being close to the front lines.
It's for those reasons that most often the insurgent, the asymmetric small organization, its end comes from within the total entity rather than on the open field. Think about David Sterling. We've talked briefly about him. In World War II, started the SAS, a clandestine fighting force whose goal is not to displace the enemy. It was to frustrate the enemy. That went against the honor and the valor of centuries of British military history. The British military had been the most successful military by some measures. The sun never set on the British Empire because of centuries of refining the rules and sticking to the script. And his proposal was he was going to hide in the desert, grow a beard, wear a turban, speak another language, drive an American Jeep with aircraft guns mounted to the front of it. And at night, under the cover of darkness, he was going to drive onto a German airfield, light up the night, and then run back into the desert before anybody could figure out what they're doing. And in pure British military form, that's bad form.
That's right.
It's cowardly. It's a massive undercutting of what we do here.
It did not fit the standard operating procedure. How many times do organizations go back and review standard operating procedures? Not often.
Not often.
And many times more get added, more and more get added. Organizations need to go back and say, what was this developed for? What was the intention of this? And how firmly do we need to hold this? When can we break this norm or this rule?
Invariably, the processes are based off of history. The processes are based off of historical strategies, and they're protecting against historical issues. As you think about trying to evolve warfare or evolve business and approach to market, you're going to find yourself at odds with the historical processes over and over and over again. There's this really interesting and unfortunate things that happen. So let's take an example, a generic example of precision planting. We were hiring very different people in their DNA than the rest of the broader ownership structure. Really, since the transaction from the founder, that's been true. They had different titles. They had different skill sets. They had broader job descriptions. They were expected to adapt and to adjust to the environment. And whether it was the vehicles that they needed, whether it was the compensation structure that they needed, whether it was the phone plan that they needed, every one of them was out of process. Let's flip to the other side of the phone. The person whose job it is to control all vehicles globally for a multinational organization. That job is recruited for, and the people that are successful at it are process adherence people. They believe that growth happens through adherence to the process. They're measured, their metrics are not on how well did I adjust the process to the situation. It's how well did I conform to the process.
In fact, their bonuses were probably tied to how well they police the process that they were in charge of.
Completely right.
Yeah, something that you and I preached often was people still need to be in control of the process.
Yes.
If there is a process that is put in place, it should be for a reason, and it should be to help enable the people do something in a better or more consistent way. It wasn't that we were anti-process. It's just, let's put the right processes in for the right reasons, and then also have the wisdom to say, let's reevaluate this. Is it doing the intended thing that we meant it to do?
Yes. There has to be protection from the top when the insurgent mindset needs something that doesn't fit in with the broader organization's processes. An example from David Sterling, as we said, they were using American Jeeps with aircraft guns mounted on the hood. They were welding racks onto the Jeeps so that they could carry enough fuel to drive 1,000 miles nonstop. Desert warfare at the time was a tank warfare. It made zero sense to the procurement officers of the British military to send light, unarmored vehicles into battle. Sterling had to find a way to get the approvals from up top to get exemptions so that he could go to the field with the strategy that he was asked to do. But it's a constant tension between you're not following the process, and my job as a process owner is to make sure people follow the process.
I'm guessing those requests blew a few minds.
Yeah. We were always looking for leaders that were willing to break the rules, but were able to retain enough likability to maintain utility and maintain relationships with the established organization. There wasn't room for this kind of like, forget you, I'm more important than you, I've got the CEO's and signet ring, so get out of my way. You would get your way that one time, and then that person was basically going to block you. The process owner was going to block you forever and for always. And so we needed people that were creative and kind, but not constrained by the processes.
Hopefully communicating what the issue was and getting the person on the other side of the process to help try to solve a problem.
That's right.
Together.
There's one story that comes to mind on this. There was a large OEM that was considering doing business with Precision Planting. And this was early. We weren't the multinational. We weren't the well-known brand. We were still this small farm shop in Tremont, and this large global organization was trying to decide whether or not to be a customer of ours, and therefore we would be a supplier to them. And so they sent their supplier auditor. And this person is the prototype of the process holder. Think of Roxanne in Monsters, Inc. Wazowski, where's your paperwork? That's the personality that I'm thinking of. She comes and she has 100 questions that we're going to work through. And it is thorough. It does not engender any trust in what we've done.
Yeah, so that was a painful few days,
That's
as
right.
I remember.
And so you and I took the strategy that we were not going to conform to all the rules. We were not going to just bow down to all the questions, but we were also trying not to be jerks as well. She was not a fan. Pretty sure you and I have never gotten a Christmas card from her whatsoever. The craziest thing happens. The audit is usually the first thing that happens. She was sent kind of urgently, said, hey, go investigate these guys. Halfway through the 2-day audit, I get an email that says her CEO has signed a supply agreement with us. It was unfortunate for her because the back half of the audit, you and I knew we had already won.
It was already approved.
It was already done. We continued to go through the process as we could, but we made sure she understood that we were already a supplier. And she finishes, I'll never forget it. She finishes the audit and she says, this is the worst supplier audit I have ever experienced. You guys have no processes. You have no documentation. You had no answers for most of my questions. And if this was a normal occurrence, I would get in my car and I would write an email that says, we should never do business with you guys. But seeing as the CEO has already signed an agreement with you, I guess we're going to have to figure out how you can change your business so that you can pass this audit. My comment back to her, in all love, in all kindness, in all reverence, and a fair bit of sarcasm, was, don't you think it's possible that because of who we are is why the CEO signed before your audit came back? Don't you think it's because of our speed and our agility and our belief and our connectedness to the front line? That's why the CEO went out of the process and signed the contract with us? I don't remember, Brad, but I don't think she necessarily agreed with my assessment of the situation.
I don't think she did either. There was a follow-up to that. She asked us to go and look at another supplier in the local area.
Okay.
That supplier is no longer in business. They said largely because of the overhead structure that was involved to be able to pass an audit, but not be a profitable company, not be an innovative company, and not being able to sustain the business for the long term.
And follow up, that business that was auditing us later purchased us and became our ownership.
That's right.
Why? Because of who we were in many ways. So circle back. The topic of the insurgent mindset is often not appreciated, and it actually frustrates the incumbent organization. We can go all the way back to Malcolm Gladwell's book, David and Goliath. This whole journey started with Malcolm Gladwell in a book saying that if you take a different mindset, you can knock out something that's 10 times bigger than you. If you go to the story in Scripture about David and Goliath, the establishment, being the Israelite army, was frustrated with David not following the rules. In fact, Saul, the king, brings David to his tent and says, well, if you're going to go out and fight him, I need you to fight him following the rules.
Here's my sword. Here's my shield. Here's my armor.
I'm going to send you out onto the field following the incumbent rules. David says, I can't fight like this. I've fought with a sling and stone against lions. I'm not afraid of this guy, but the establishment cannot internalize a different way. In fact, David kills Goliath, and much of the rest of Saul's life, he's trying to get rid of David. He's intimidated by David. He's frustrated by David.
And threatened by David.
And was threatened. Absolutely. He was jealous of David's success in many ways. It is to say that if you're going to take this insurgent mindset, you have to be comfortable with your organization being uncomfortable with you. It's biblical. Literally,
yes.
It's biblical.
It is interesting. It's how you measure success. So many people can measure it by a position that they achieve, but it's so much more than this. It's the people that you can impact. Are you fulfilling the mission that you're called?
Yeah. So as I think about the years coming out of the transition, as the founder sold the business, over that next decade, as Precision Planting came onto the main stage, we as a group were extremely intentional about who we brought on to the organization, how we structured the organization. And in many ways, it was modeled after historically successful insurgent organizations that had taken on something much, much bigger than them and succeeded at the mission. Back to the beginning, the mission was to change agriculture from a farm shop in Tremont. The mission wasn't beating a competitor. Most of the competitors that were competing against us, I think their mission was to beat us. Our mission was to serve the underserved customer. But we had to structure it in a way that we could continue to grow, continue to expand, despite being on the main stage and having willful combatants that were significantly larger than us.
For sure. We never looked at the competition and said, this is exactly who we want to be when we grow up. We were comfortable with who we were and focusing on real problems that needed to be solved.
That is so well said. Having been a part of a lot of acquisitions and a lot of discussions with founders and a lot of discussions with small organizations, a lot of them believe that big multinational organizations have it figured out and are trying as rapidly as possible to become like those big multinational organizations. We never believed that.
That's right.
We woke up every day trying to avoid becoming like a large multinational organization. Not that there isn't a place for it, but we knew that's not who we could become.
We were comfortable being a little weird and a little bit different.
That's right. And it was and has been a lot of fun
to
be weird and different.
Yes.
Brad, thanks so much for spending time today and talking through not just the history of precision planting, but really the strategy behind precision planting.
No, it's been fun reminiscing together on this.
Awesome. We'll catch you on the next one.
Thanks.
For those that caught immediately that the process owner in Monsters, Inc. is named Roz and not Roxanne, I am very impressed and expect nothing less from the caliber of people listening to Grody and Unprofessional. For those that after listening to this episode would like to discuss the merits of having headquarters back from the front lines, go ahead and send me an invite to a reoccurring quarterly alignment meeting. I'll be the one dressed like a shepherd, holding a sling. Thanks for your time. Let's do this again soon.